Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of the Joy at Home podcast. I'm super excited about this episode today. I have the sweetest soul joining me as we're going to be talking about health and different things that you can do as a homeschool mom to take good care of your health. We're going to be diving into all sorts of interesting things today. And I am so excited to introduce today's guest. Julia Lawless is wife to a grass farmer and also a second generation homeschooling mother of four wild and wonderful children. That's her words. I love that. Plus one more on the way. They make their home in Oklahoma where they raise grass fed cattle and egg laying ducks. Julia has been a health enthusiast since the age of 12 when she first read Nourishing Traditions and started brewing and concocting without abandon. She says she can't count the number of bottles of homemade kombucha that have exploded all over the many kitchens that she has lived in since then, as she went about discovering that perfect level of fizz. Every day, she said she realizes how much she has yet to learn and that God gave her children, poetry, and a garden to be her very best teachers. Welcome to the podcast, Julia.
Thank you so much.
It is so great to have you here today. Oh my gosh, you're just the sweetest soul and so relatable. And so I am thrilled to have you joining today.
Well,
So,
this is my very first podcast, so you'll just have to bear with me, and I'm excited to be here. You are very sweet and excited about our conversation. So,
oh, it's so good to have you. You know what, Julia? I never would have guessed that this is your first podcast. So,
oh, well, good.
you are a natural. You're a natural on camera and you're a natural in just
I will
talking
say
about
I
your
did have a lot
passion.
of practice talking at my dad's conventions as a teenager. I would like run his booths for
Oh my gosh. Yes. We are going to talk
lots
about
of
that.
homeschool moms in my life, not just as a one myself. So,
I love that so much. Yes, you relate so very, very well. And it is no wonder why. So, you are a second generation homeschooling family, which is so awesome. So, tell me a little bit more about this because you just kind of alluded to your beginnings there.
yeah, so I am Andrew Pudawa's daughter of IEW. So I grew up with, I was the full homeschool experience. So by the time I came along, that was like they were fully homeschooling. And yeah, it was an adventure for sure. I got to be kind of a guinea pig, which was good
Oh my
on his
goodness.
ideas and his experiments. And I certainly, it's very funny to go to like his talks, hear my own dad talking and be like, wow, I think he even has said this in talks. Like one of us said, why don't you talk like that at home? I'm just like, he's so, you know, it was always so fun. And we were always so proud to be like, you know, to see him doing so, like, he loved so passionately and reaching so many people and being so engaging. And like, I'd rather listen to him over anyone, even though he's my dad, I hear him all the time, but he's my favorite speaker still to listen to. And I still listen to his stuff for inspiration for my own kids,
Oh my gosh.
especially.
I thoroughly agree with that. I love listening to him speak. He is so engaging and so passionate. So I am curious, so he speaks so eloquently at these conventions and whatnot. Was it similar or different as you're being homeschooled and he's there kind of being part of that?
Well, I think he talked about this a little bit with you, how he did classes, and I think when he's in a class mode, he's kind of he clicks into that, like, he's joking and he's got that, and he jokes all the time, and even at home, family get-togethers, it's always, how many new jokes is dad gonna, try to pull while we're visiting, kind of thing. But yeah, he has a very naturally engaging, you know, personality. But there's like you have kids. It's like kids can be so grating and annoying and just like whiny and don't want to do the work that you don't understand why they can't just do it. And so, it's as a parent now myself, I'm like, it's, it's really hard to uh it's really hard to keep that balance of patience and this like persistence that is
Yeah,
necessary. And but I did like I had a lot of freedom, especially into my high school years to pursue what I wanted. I went through a rough patch in middle school, but I kind of came out of that and then I had a lot of natural interests, the whole relevancy talk he gives, I had a lot of inherent things that were relevant to me that were, you know, um, health and homesteading and, agrarian and kind of poetic, like the poetic reason for those things. And he and I love to study, like love to talk about that together as at that time. So we had a lot of really great conversations. And he mentioned reading The Death of Christian Culture, I think, which or the Restoration. There's two, one or the other, Restoration of Christian Culture, and I read it at the same time, and it was very life changing for me too, and very much formed like what I chose to do with my life and what I choose to pursue. And, my, it kind of affirmed my budding interest in homesteading and all that. But it definitely was like, it really, and my dislike of the kind of modernity, I guess you could say, that just as a teen, I was struggling with like, how do I fit into this world that I don't, you know, really agree with, but I also am stuck here. So
for
what's,
sure.
so
Yeah,
that was something that was really formative and we talked about a lot. And I'm so grateful for that because I felt like we kind of went through it together in a certain sense because he was discovering and I didn't feel like it was ever like, oh, I know everything and let me tell you. It was very much a discovery together. And I'm sure he had to put up with a lot of, kind of wild idealism on my part that I'm sure wisdom in old age and having
oh my
children and
gosh,
all of that.
I love
He's
that.
like, she'll figure it out one of these days.
Oh my
But
gosh, don't we when we become parents, did you experience gaining this new appreciation for your parents?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's crazy.
Oh my
Especially
goodness.
schooling. I'm just like, oh man. I hear, I grew up hearing I heard all of his talk. I went to all his talks. I heard them as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm just like, it's weird being like, I'm that homeschool mom he's talking to now. It's like a weird feeling of like, I can relate. Yes, this is, you know, and
Yeah.
then watching him teach my kids too. So he's teaching my daughter violin right now, which is awesome. And he's done a
Oh,
lot of writing stuff with my older two kids, and he's gonna be doing more classes. And it's really neat to see that come. And I'm very grateful for that support because I'm like, this is hard. It's really
no
hard.
kidding. Oh my gosh, that is such an incredible progression, and then now he's involved. So, I mean, really for you, wouldn't you say it was just a natural progression then into homeschooling
Yeah,
your own kids? Like
very much.
it just
Yeah,
always was
it
meant to
wasn't really
be?
any like other thought. Like, I mean, my son was extremely extroverted and really thrived on being with other kids. And so I was kind of like, oh, I wish I had a little more that he could do with other kids. Homeschooling felt like because we were so rural and everything, there just wasn't a lot for him. So I was like, well, if there was a really awesome school, like, classical or Charlotte Maid School, like he would have been my one kid that I would have been like, maybe I'd put him in because he just for the social aspect. But I mean, he has a lot of, several people moved into our community and friends, and they have classes and co-ops and things. So he's doing great now, but he was my one where I'm like, man, your personality would do a lot better with friends and a teacher that you like isn't mom.
Oh, I
That,
understand that. Yeah, sometimes yeah, that can be, kind of a blurry line sometimes with just accountability. I know so we, of course, utilize all the IEW material, and our first year, utilizing it because we actually made the switch from public school into homeschooling. So my daughter was in those middle school years and we started using IEW structure and style. And we were doing it like we were utilizing the videos, but then we were doing it like parent led. So I was, checking her papers every week. And she was having a challenging time getting those handed into me on time. And so the second year we utilized the teachers at IEW, and so she'd have that accountability to check in once a week, and she was getting them done on time
yeah.
with
Yeah,
that
it's like,
that
oh, mom,
accountability.
mom understands. Mom will like, how much can I get mom to let me take off? And
Yeah. There
fine
def
enough. Maybe she'll cave.
there definitely could be some challenges there. And then you mentioned the rural area, so that's actually the perfect segue because I want to talk about what you guys are doing there as a farm family. So, okay, a couple questions. First, you're in Oklahoma in this rural area. I was curious, is your family close to you? Like, do you have them pretty close by as a support?
Yeah, yeah. So it's actually kind of funny. So my husband's family moved to Oklahoma like 5 years before we did. They were also Californians who left, and we never knew them there. But so my husband's father bought like 200 acres and sold off pieces of it to several people. So that we live near a Benedictine abbey that is beautiful, and we love it. And so a lot of people have moved there because it's like we get to be rural, but we also have that kind of spiritual anchor. Um, and so people keep moving to where we live. And so he sold off a lot of land to people around, including my family. So my husband's family sold land to my family. And um, and then my family built a house, and IEW, half of it is there actually still on that land in Clear Creek. They kind of have different locations in different places because it's grown so much. But that
Wow.
was we first moved out to Oklahoma. The whole thing was we were operating out of this really large building there. So and several of our like the employees that were in California moved with us, and and then it just grew and grew and grew, and now a bunch of our friends work there and stuff. So that's really neat. But then um, so yeah, so my parents did that, and then they ended up moving into Tulsa for time. My mom's parents were, aging and sick, and she needed to be close to them where they were, and various things that they had to be in the city for a while, but they still kept their land. And then my husband and I, after we got married, we bought land from my husband's father and built our own house there. So we're like right in between. We're on like a block with a lot of people that was all like owned by, you know, originally my dad or my husband's father. And then my dad actually bought more land because he wanted to be able to, it was good. It was on auction, and like, let's just buy it because more people want to buy it. And if we have more animals, so we have kind of a big core there. And it's really awesome. Like my husband's sister has kids the same age. She lives like across the pasture from us. So it's
Oh,
like a dream come true. My kids can run back and forth to cousins. And so it's really like I couldn't have dreamed up a better scenario, just minus the chiggers. That would have been nice without that.
well,
Yeah.
we're in the kind of in the middle of nowhere, Iowa on 40 acres,
Okay.
and we have the chiggers too, so I feel you.
I didn't even know what a chigger was till I moved to Oklahoma. I never experienced a chigger growing up in California. I was like, chigger? What's that? Is that like a like cartoon? It sounds like a Tigger cartoon. I don't. I just chigger is weird. But so we had my husband's family. His dad had like a really big engineering job and just decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go and do the Joel Salatin grass farming thing. And he kind of pursued that, but he's an engineer at heart and he couldn't stay away from it. So they did a lot of animals, but it kind of was too much too quickly. A lot of deaths, a lot of just things not done well because there wasn't enough knowledge in relation to how quickly problems were rising for my husband. And so, he's from a family of seven. So there were several of them as teens and young adults that were working on their farm, ranch, homestead, whatever. So his dad originally invested in the cattle originally, and that original herd has grown over like almost 2 decades to where they are now. So that we kind of took over care and overseeing of the cattle and kind of worked out, like a, structure of payment and all that. So the cattle, we had done goats. I say we, my husband mostly. He'd done goats for profit. He'd done chickens and eggs. We had so many eggs and we couldn't sell them. And like there's such a glut of eggs. And just like tried a lot of different things, and it was cattle were just the best. They eat the grass and they respect one single line of electric fence, and you move them really easily. They don't break out very often compared to goats. And it just, they were the best, time versus reward kind of animal that we were doing, and profitability. So we decided to, after we started having kids and we're just like, this is all that we kind of just focus on the cattle. We didn't even have chickens for a while because we're just like, we just need to stabilize and get through this toddler years
Yes.
and then focus on that. So we've kind of, the cattle has been the stable thing through all of it. And we tried various methods of selling to the auction, selling locally, doing bulk, like buying clubs of meat, and just we had so many times of like our freezers going out because of outages and losing all this meat. And it was really hard to make that work, like volume wise, like what we needed to be selling in relation to storage. And we also, during COVID, there was this crazy like shortage of meat processing facilities. You couldn't get an appointment for a year to get a cow in.
Yeah.
And so we kind of panicked at that point. So anyway, all of these kind of difficulties and things led us to asking, was there, what else could we do? And one thing that we had been doing for quite a while was selling our beef, like ground beef with the organs mixed in, and people loved that, and it was working really well. Like for them to eat organs, they didn't taste the liver at all. And so that had been kind of something we were selling, but they're just, like I said, the frozen meat volume is just a lot to manage. So then that's kind of what led us to saying, could we put these into beef sticks, and would they still taste as good? And we found a processor pretty locally that could work with us, and they're like, yes, that we can get USD approval for this. And it just kind of all worked out. Like God was kind of leading us down that path. All these failures and frozen meat losses because of the freezers, it just kind of was like, okay, this is where God is taking us through all of that headache that we went through.
It is
So
okay, it is so fun and refreshing to chat with someone who lives the farm life, because so many people I meet so many amazing, wonderful people and get to do interviews with them, which is great. But so many of them are, from these big cities, which is also great. I love to go visit the big cities. But to hear someone who's like everything you're saying, I'm relating, right? My kids and my dad do cattle across the gravel road. We were chatting before we hit record, and just
yeah,
yes, the electric, the freezer losses in the middle of nowhere. And when COVID hit, so we get beef from my dad, and when COVID hit, you couldn't get into the processor, and then we had to buy
yeah,
some beef from the grocery store. And my kids are like, they didn't want to eat it. They were like, this is gross. 'Cause
that's
it's
so
so
funny.
different, than farm raised,
Yeah,
and just all those, like, trials and just the journey of living the farm life, but also
yeah,
those beautiful, wonderful, good moments of, like,
yeah,
clothes drip drying out on the line in the country air, and it's just so good. The wide open spaces, there are so many
yeah,
good things. So, okay,
yeah,
you mentioned whole sticks, and I want to come back to that at the end of our conversation, but let's chat just a little bit about homesteading. I know we were chatting before we hit record about homesteading. And so I'm thinking, like, if you would consider yourself like a budding homesteader, if that's kind of what you were referencing. I know that's kind of
yeah.
where we're at over here.
I wouldn't say budding because we've already like budded and bloomed and very briefly and died, and like a life cycle of homesteading. But we're kind of like, ideologically we're committed to what homesteading is. It's just a matter of like finding what we have the bandwidth for, what our children can help us with. Like I have very difficult pregnancies and like things like that. So there's time periods where it's just like these become very difficult. And so and also just the predator problem. So we have to be smart about like, okay, what can we actually sustain? And so, like I said, we had chickens at one point, tons of chickens, and we were getting like 100 eggs a day because we got this crazy good deal on them with like $1 a chicken. We're like, well, let's just get 100 of them. And it was like, we didn't have a plan. How are we going to manage these eggs? Where are we going to store them? And we were eating a lot of eggs and getting really sick of them. And like eventually though, like that's a lot of chickens. We didn't have a good enough protection from predators and they all ended up getting taken out by predator. I mean, and we were like, well, they were only dollars. So, and they were older chickens. That was why we got a good deal. So it's like, well, they're going to stop laying in here anyway. But it was also just like that feeling of like, if we don't have the ability to maintain the setup to do well, have the animals do well, it's like, it's just not the right thing for us. So we just didn't do any birds at all for a while. And then we have all these ponds around our house. And we were just, there was a friend that we had talked to that was just going on and on about ducks. I'm like, maybe that's our answer because they're way more hardy from predators and they are a lot more resilient to like excessive heat and things. So, and we have all these ponds, which is free food for them. Like they can just forage in the pond for, all the bugs and things in there. So that has been amazing. I love the ducks. We've had them for over a year now, and they lay awesome eggs that are so much better than chicken eggs. I love them, the flavor, and that's been awesome. We love the ducks. I think anyone that has a pond on their property, like I would almost venture to say, do ducks instead of chickens because like they are just so hardy. Like we've lost so many less ducks, and if we can't lock them up because we're gone or something that comes up, they can just go out and sleep in the water, which provides protection from predators right there. So that's been so great. Cause I mean, I can't even tell you, like one night you don't lock up the chickens or you don't lock them up early enough and you lose 7 to 1 predator in one night. It's like, so anyway, yeah, that's been kind of our approach. And now that our oldest is 11, almost 12, and he's like, I want to milk goats and I want to, do all these things. So he's currently fencing and helping my husband get that set up. So we're going to start milking goats soon and see how that goes. I had a cow once upon a time before I got married. And I was just like, you know what, as long as I'm having babies and I don't have a kid old enough to help, and my husband has just got so much he's got to take care of, I'm like, I can't do a milk animal. It's just a neighbor and I would trade kombucha for milk. So that was awesome. I loved that setup. But yeah, milking is a huge commitment. So my son, we'll see how this goes. It's a new step for us. And we're just, keeping that going little by little as we can, taking it 1 year at a time.
Yeah.
Whatever we have going on. So
It's a journey for sure. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think slow and steady, little by
yes.
little, I'm just like, I'm smiling so big as you're sharing all of this because I relate to it. So I
Yeah.
grew up in Iowa on a farm. And
Oh,
then
okay.
just a couple years ago, we actually built our house on some of the acreage that I grew up on.
Oh,
And
wow.
so
That's so cool.
it is so fun. And then, like I said, my dad's cattle are across the gravel road. And so we built our house, we moved in, we just kind of started slow and steady. We ended up with a pet turtle, and then we had a farm dog. We had a couple of farm cats. We just picked up a new baby farm cat this week. And then we got into the chickens, and everyone told me, get more baby chicks than you want because some of them will die. Well, we got 15 Isa Browns, we got 3 guineas and 2 ducks, and none of them died. None of
Yeah.
them died. And then we added a handful of silkies into the mix and like, okay, like everything is just living. My husband built this just incredibly secure chicken coop. Like I
That's
mean, it's crazy. So, but then they're free ranging them during the day and then they're going in, at night and whatever. So
mm,
it's just
that's
been
great.
fun to see that just kind of like growing and growing and growing. I think animals are such a good adventure for kids.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
my daughter now is doing sourdough. They're
Oh,
brewing
wow.
they're brewing kombucha right now. And then she actually
Oh.
just last week, my dad took a beef in and she got the tallow. And so she was rendering tallow in the basement.
Wow. What a
So
good
my
experience.
16-year-old daughter is like, she's in deeper than I even am. But
Yeah.
I wanted though to talk to you about the kombucha because I know this is a great talking point for you. I know that you had some wonderful memories of learning how to do the kombucha. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So like remember the very beginning days when Synergy first like out with it on the shelves of our local health food store, and it was like, what is this stuff? And we tried it and kind of liked it, and it was super expensive. And then, we had read Nourishing Traditions, which had the recipe for it, so I just kind of started experimenting with it. And I think by the time I was like 14, I really didn't care for it plain. I was like, I want synergy. Like I want what they do, but
Yeah.
myself. So I like researched second fermentation where you put it into the bottles and you add fruit or whatever flavorings and then let it get fizzy and getting the right kind of glass bottles that don't explode and just quite a process. There's a lot more out there now, like online, just walk you through it super easily. It's great. But when I first started, it was nothing, just crickets online. So yeah, so I figured out like how to get really fizzy kombucha and I loved it. And I did struggle with the sugar. I it has a pretty high sugar, and yes, the mushrooms eat some of that, or the scobies, or whatever you want to call them, eat some of the sugar, but I couldn't get it to where I still liked the taste. It was like too vinegary if I let it eat all the sugar, and if I didn't let it eat the sugar, I didn't feel great from having too much of it. So I at one point was like, maybe I could just do it with honey, and I tried that, didn't work. But then I discovered a alternate version of kombucha called Jun. And this was like probably only 12 years ago. So like halfway through at least, I was like found Jun, and Jun is kind of a slightly different culture that uses green tea and honey as
Oh,
its
wow.
for medium. So like you can't convert a regular kombucha mushroom into honey and any other kind of tea than black. But you can get Jun mushrooms, which has been cultivated forever in China or whatever, on green tea and honey, which makes sense because they didn't have white sugar for most of history. So that must have been an adaptation from. So I don't know how that the science between the adaptions of that. I just personally knew that I couldn't switch it on my own. So I got a Jun mushroom just on Amazon actually,
No
and I
way.
was converted. I mean, it was like they call it, when I was researching it, the champagne of kombucha, and they're right. Like it doesn't get it doesn't get very vinegary at all. The regular kombucha could have a really intense like vinegary, like whoo, if you let it go too long. Well, Jun is amazing and it's way faster. It only takes, depending on the temperature, 5 to 7 days. Whereas,
Oh my
you
goodness.
know, the black tea one, sometimes you have to do like 10 days. So, depending on how much sugar you want out, eaten up. So I love it. And it gets a lot fizzier more easily. I think maybe because of the honey or something. I don't know why. But yeah, so that's what I completely do now. And I've come up with a lot of second fermentation recipes that we like using, fruit and extracts and tea and ginger and all kinds of things. So I have kind of a whole collection. I actually sell kombucha at like a local uh, brewery. It's literally like our neighbor, but he makes beer and people wanted a non-alcoholic option. So he's like, make kombucha for me and I'll sell it. So it's really fun. I do enjoy kombucha a lot.
That is
Um,
incredible. Oh my gosh. My
yeah.
daughter and husband would just spend hours and hours with you. You should write a cookbook. Have you written all these recipes down?
I've written some of them down. Yeah, I did like a little kombucha class several years ago, and I was like, okay, I better actually like measure everything and like give it to people with actual measurements because you just get so used to like, oh, it's like this much of the blender of fruit, and like I didn't wasn't measuring for so long. So yeah, I've written some of them down. Raspberry ginger is by far my favorite of all time.
Oh,
We have
that
like,
sounds
a
amazing.
tropical one we really like with fresh bananas, which believe it or not, it's like I wouldn't think that would taste good with kombucha, but with the John, it tastes awesome. Um, we have like a blueberry one we like. So I just did lavender, which is kind of fun. So there's a lot you can do with it. It's amazing. And the second ferment just it makes it fizzy, it makes it flavorful, and I think it mellows the flavor a little bit even after that second ferment. It's kind of how it was meant to be.
That
And
is
I love
that's incredible.
the honey actually, like there's a lot of research that fermented honey has like amplified nutritional properties. And so like especially if it's raw and it has the pollen in it. Pollen has so much like B vitamins and things that when you ferment them, like are multiplied. Like they will test it before and after fermentation. After fermentation, it's got more of the B vitamins, particularly because B vitamins are a fermentation, like they produce through fermentation. So I love that too because it's like, wow, you're actually like working with this thing to amplify it. That honey, the properties in it. So that's really cool too
That is so
about it.
cool. So, Jun, is that how you pronounce it? Can you spell
Yeah,
that for me in case
I
people wanna
think
look it
so.
up?
It's just Jun.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, I think it's a Chinese or something. I don't know. But
AUN,
I
okay, my
on
husband and
Kombucha on Amazon, they'll have mushrooms on there, and I mean, you can't really find it readily available in the stores right now. I think Whole Foods might have one brand, but
okay.
it's really expensive and doesn't taste very good in my opinion compared to like the flavor, when you add a lot of other flavorings. So, yeah, I feel like it's kind of the next thing, like people are
It
all into
yeah, it
this
sounds
is
like it might be. I'm gonna have to pass that along. Oh my goodness. So, have you seriously, honestly exploded jars as you were doing this? Because okay,
I
that's my
yeah.
biggest fear with my husband and my daughter doing this. I'm like, please, please just don't explode anything in the kitchen. So you can actually explode things.
Yes, I bought some swing top bottles from Target that I was like, "Oh, these are really expensive," and I like the swing top because they have to be very good seals in order to get the second ferment to work. If any air can escape, it won't get fizzy. So I bought them, and I'm so grateful, like, no one was in the room or anything, but I heard, like, this explode like, this
Oh,
and found glass everywhere. So, yeah, I never again use a cheap bottle. My favorite bottles, if you do second fermentation, is just to reuse Synergy bottles. They are really good. They seal really well. I like the big, 48-ounce ones because my family drinks a whole one in one meal, So,
yes.
those are the best bottles. I wouldn't buy the expensive. They're really, the swing top, they're really hard to clean. They're so narrow and the seals are kind of finicky. And I've had great luck with this Synergy bottle. So I just use that. Plus, you can like buy a bottle and get it for, buy the kombucha, get the bottle for free kind of thing. So that
Yes. Oh
that's
my
what I
gosh.
recommend if you want to do second ferments. Just do that. I've never had one of those explode. But I have had like the glass explode. I have had it where, especially the banana, because so much like yeast and sugar in bananas. I have had it where like you open it and you like, it's like a volcano. The whole thing's out of the bottle in a second. And the swing top bottles, one time it got all the way up to like my 9-foot ceiling, like literally shot up to the ceiling. So the swing top, I think, lets it out faster. Whereas with this twist, you can kind of let it out and be like, okay, how fizzy is this? Okay, it's not too bad. Just pour it. Or like, okay, put it in a bowl. It's gonna, fizz a little too much. So finding
That's
the exact right amount of time to like leave it so it doesn't get too busy. Yeah, it's an art.
that's so great. That is such an adventure. I am just sitting here like my daughter would just absolutely adore you. Oh my gosh.
Oh, well, I may have
Oh,
a little kombucha chat with her sometimes. She's
oh,
like
yes.
on it and like, I don't know what do
We
I
should
do? So
we should definitely set that up. She would be all about that. She is so into learning about these things. And it has been so cool seeing her come from public school into homeschooling and then kind of like find herself and find her passions. Like she is so into homesteading and chicken keeping and the sourdough bread and
yeah.
she loves to dress modestly and she's grown so much in her faith and it's all by her choice and that has been so beautiful. So I want to encourage her as she's pursuing some of this stuff even
Yeah.
more than I am into it. I'm like, yes, like learn about all these things because
Well,
it's
I love that. I appreciate that so much because I was that teenager where it was just like I was doing all these kind of weird things and as a mom, it's like you don't have time to do everything. And so like my mom liked the idea of sourdough and all these things but she just didn't have the time. So I was the one like was like, I'm doing these and it was great. And now I don't have time myself. So I'm like, well, my sister's making sourdough, so I like trade meat for sourdough, and I love bartering. Bartering is great because it's like I don't have time for it all. I'll
well,
do kombucha.
It's
but
like
I'm not doing every other thing
it's like
anymore.
this old-fashioned way of life that's so good. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, I wish that we would go back to that in a lot of ways. There are a lot of good things about it. There really
It
are.
really is. I do think like when you get into it and you see how much work it is, you realize like this was a community. Like people, did these big like meat butcherings or fermenting, like, canning things, all like community, like the Amish, still do that. They have big parties and they can all the tomatoes from everyone's gardens and things. I think that like that we need to work more towards that as possible because I think people will get overwhelmed if they're like, I'm going to do it all. And I'm also
Yeah,
have 5 young kids and I'm, homeschooling and I'm, like it's a lot to do yourself. So the more that you can, do together as a community, just even with a few friends, like I love to do fermenting parties because it's like we're making a mess. Let's just do it together, have fun,
sure.
and just clean up the mess once, like with sauerkraut and stuff like that. So I think that's a really good way to go. And something, if people are kind of starting in on this and they're starting to feel overwhelmed, like find friends who want to do it too, and then work together because you'll enjoy it more. Your kids will be easier to deal with. Like young kids, they can play with each other and you'll have, half the mess because, you're sharing the mess. So I think, especially like it's awesome that your teenage daughter's doing it. For moms that have young kids, like I think that's the way to go because it's a lot to do on your own. And your kids might want to help, but their help might be more difficult than what it actually is, when they're little. My 11-year-old, he's like now finally cooking, doing all these things. I'm like, you could practically take over, the kombucha or the sourdough now. But before it was just like, okay, hang on. I know you all need me while I do all this stuff in the kitchen. And it's a lot to do with little ones.
Yeah, we
For
really
people
need
in
that.
that stage of life, that's, I think, the way to go.
We need that community and support for a million reasons, but
Yeah.
yes, all of that completely resonates. So, a minute ago, you mentioned this book called Nourishing Traditions that you read at, I think it was 12 years old. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear, like, what was it inside of this book that really sparked your interest in health and wellness?
Yeah. So, I don't remember the context. It may actually have been kombucha that kind of led me into that book, but it's actually a cookbook, which is funny because you're like, I read the cookbook. But in the beginning of the cookbook and on the sides of every single page with recipes, there's like excerpts. But in it, Sally Fallon, she kind of presents in a very like broken down, easy to understand way the work of an incredible man named Dr. Weston Price. And he was a dentist in the earliest 20th century who he saw in his like just in his 25 years of practice a huge change in the health, especially the oral health, but also just diseases of his patients. He actually lost his own son to an abscessed tooth,
Oh my
which is
gosh.
so ironic because he was a dentist. His own son died. So he was just like, what is going on? Like, why was I fine? Like, why is my mouth fine? And like all of the children that are coming into me now are so unhealthy. Their teeth are so crowded. They have so many cavities, abscesses, and at the time, no antibiotics. So like they're just dying, tuberculosis, all these diseases that were just really just exploded during the industrial revolution and after. And so he kind of thought, well, it's probably because of that and it's probably due to the changes in the food. So he was said, well, how can I find people who are still eating the way they did before the industrial revolution, like eating their traditional ancestral foods that they've been eating for hundreds and however long years. So he was at this crucial period in history where there were isolated groups of people living that way who had not introduced any modern foods whatsoever. But cameras were invented. So he literally traveled around the entire world. He went to 4 different continents and he photographed and meticulously documented the things that he found in these places. So he traveled to like 14 different groups of indigenous people, everywhere from Swiss Alps, extremely remote village in the very, very top of the Alps in Europe, to Africans, Maasai tribes, to Alaskan Eskimos, to New Zealand, like South, like Islanders. And he took pictures. He was, as a dentist, particularly interested in their mouth, like what was going on. Did they have cavities? Did they have, good oral health? And what he found was just incredible, that all these people all over the world eating drastically different diets. I mean, we're talking, they had grass-fed milk, butter, cheese, rye bread, sourdough rye in the Alps, to meat, milk, and blood in Africa, to shellfish and quinoa and tropical fruits in the tropic, like vastly different. All of them had basically no cavities. They all had perfectly straight teeth, no crowding. They had room for all their teeth, including wisdom teeth. They had, no tuberculosis, no, none of the diseases that were plaguing the people of that time, especially. Um, and what was really cool too is he found people that were further in and more modernized. So, like, he went lower into the Alps and found Swiss people, same genetics, sometimes even related to the people who were still isolated, who had adopted modern foods like white flour, sugar, canned fruits, canned, meats, like not even nearly as bad as processed food we're talking now. I mean, this is like 1920s. But those processed foods, they had adopted them, stopped eating their traditional way immediately within one generation, crowded teeth, terrible tooth decay, lots of disease. He even had like a documentation of two brothers, one who left, one who stayed in the traditional community, and like the way that their health was. The other one was dying of tuberculosis, like just, and the other one was super healthy. Just crazy. I mean, what he was able to do with his, contrasting these genetic, so it wasn't genetics, right? It wasn't just, oh, well, genetically they're lucky. He proved that the genetics, one generation of changing the diet and not eating the traditional foods and introducing modern foods, one generation, you lose all of the, all of the health of the parents. And so what was interesting though, like I said, the diets were drastically different. So some were grain free, some almost virtually no vegetables. And in Alaska, they ate like 80% of their diet was like seal blubber and fish and maybe some caribou or things, like, because I mean, it's like what, snowy and icy, like 3/4 of the year or whatever. Almost no vegetables, extremely healthy people. And then, they have the South Sea people who have lots of fruit, and they have, they had some grains, quinoa, things they harvested, shellfish, super healthy too. And so he was just amazed at the variety, the diversity of diet that all produce this robust health, and the same pattern: no cavities, wide arches, just overall incredible strength. 100-year-olds that were carrying massive weights on their shoulders down mountains, kind of thing, like incredible health. And so he took samples back from, well, he took really meticulous records of what they ate. So he asked them everything that he could, and watched them and wrote everything down. And there were certain foods that were particularly, like, sometimes he uses the word sacred, but like really valued by these people as the foods gave them health. And particularly for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, like, or babies, they would prioritize giving certain foods to them to ensure health for their future generations. Like, they knew that. They knew what they needed to do to be healthy. It wasn't just like, oh, we're eating whatever, we're healthy. It was like they knew that they needed to prioritize the really nutrient dense foods. And so he wrote those down. He took samples back to the US and he tested a lot of them, and found, with, pretty rudimentary testing at the time, but they were very high in vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin D. Well, actually, vitamin K didn't exist. He kind of probably identified it, actually. He didn't know
Wow.
what it was, but he called it activator X. And he found that all the foods that these people valued for good health for the future generation were high in those foods. So it varied, right? Because they had different diets. So in the Swiss Alps, it was extremely orange, like orange grass-fed butter from like the cows eating the really green grass. It was like super high in vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin D. The cheese, they would make all their summer milk into cheese, and that's what they would eat all winter, was this really, like, some cheese is like really rich color because it's the cows had the grass that turned into carotenoids, which turned into vitamin A. So they would they knew we've got to harvest the milk from the summer, eat it through the winter to keep us healthy. Or in cultures that ate meat, the Maasai that ate beef, they had blood. Literally, they would just bleed their cows because they were nomadic. But they also had, anytime they butchered an animal, always the organs. They ate that first. They ate them like fresh, and they would give them to the children. And they would feed the muscle meat to the dogs because it was like, well, that's not really full of very many nutrients, relatively speaking. So they knew it was like they'd eat the whole animal, they'd use the bones, they'd cook, they they knew, not just because they didn't want to waste it, because they knew these were important for their health. And then in like the islands that were on primarily eating seafood, it was shellfish and it was fish eggs were the prize foods. And they would dry fish eggs, so they could eat them in the winter and feed them to babies and pregnant women through the whole season. So like they they knew which foods, even though kind of obscure, like fish eggs and organs, they knew what was going to keep them healthy. There was even this really cool story where that there was this tribe in kind of Canada, lower Canada, that he visited, that were Native American tribe, that they never got scurvy. That like all of the white people around them got scurvy because nothing grew there really, like produce and vitamin C rich things. And so Weston Price wanted to know, like, how have you avoided this? They called it white man disease. And it was like a secret. And they had to like get permission from the chief to give him the information. But basically they would eat the adrenal glands raw immediately after butchering, like, and give a little piece to everyone in the village because that was extremely rich in vitamin C. And they
Wow.
didn't know what vitamin C was. They just knew that if they ate this and they didn't cook it because that degrades it, they wouldn't get white man disease. So even though they had no produce, they avoided scurvy. So like the innate knowledge is incredible. Um, and it just, to me, what was so amazing about it was that, it showed that you can kind of have like almost infinite variety in where you live and what local foods you eat. And yet if you follow like certain principles, you can be healthy just, with infinite variety. And I feel like we live in like a time where it's just so many like gurus and absolutists out there who are like, you can't eat this, and if you want to be healthy, don't eat this, or do eat that, or follow this perfect health diet and the South Beach this, and like just all these
Mhm.
like, here's how to be healthy with this one rigid idea. And he proved like you can be carnivore and be super healthy, or you can be eating grains and sourdough bread and dairy and you can be super healthy. It's not about what you're eating so much as like the groups of food, as much as making sure that you get enough of those really nutrient dense kind of, he called them sacred foods. I don't really like using that word in that context, but like, you know, um, core, like core foods that kept them healthy. And if you can just, you know, if you can just be aware of those principles, then you have so much. It's so freeing. It's because it's like dairy isn't bad, or shellfish isn't bad, or grains aren't bad. It's making sure that you get variety, but also get the nutrient dense foods. So he then went back to America and changed. He opened a clinic, like a nutritional clinic, and he took like everything he had learned about these nutrient dense foods using what he had available to him in America. So grass fed butter. He did actually use cod liver oil because that's a super rich source of vitamin A, was easy to administer to children. And he would take really sick orphans and like children who were, you know, needed help. And he would feed them at least one meal a day of like really nutrient dense food. And that like he documented reversal of cavities, just the amazing benefits that they received from this really like nutrient dense diet, which wasn't even their full diet, but that he was supplementing them with. And so he kind of, it was like a full circle thing for him. And the irony is he went into it thinking he'd find vegetarians, like fruits and vegetables eating, those will be the healthiest people. And so he was shocked when he realized like, oh no, animal
Wow.
foods and organs and shellfish and these are the foods that are keeping these people healthy,
My gosh.
primarily.
That is
So yeah,
fascinating.
it's amazing. I wish that, I don't know, I honestly thought about like writing a children's book or something. It's just like what he did was so incredible. Like it was just like the perfect thing in his time in history, because if he had 50 to 100 years late, like 50 years later, he wouldn't have found nearly so many people he could have that
Right.
were pure, like that didn't have anything introduced. And before he wouldn't have been able to get photographs, and the photographs are incredible. So you can go to Weston, I think it's westonaprice.com. I'll let you know, put in the show notes, but there's all of like like a lot of photos. He has this big book that thick documenting everything called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and it is a heavy read. So that's why Nourishing Traditions was really cool, because Sally Fallon took the heavy material and like really simplified it and just put it in her cookbook, and then gave you recipes like, okay, here's how to, you know, cook with organ meats or eat more of these things that are nourishing. She had like sourdough and fermented foods that she kind of added those things, kind of just because obviously they didn't have refrigeration. So fermenting was how they did it. They didn't can things. So she really makes it accessible, and her recipes are amazing. Like they're good recipes. They're, really delicious. So I super recommend that book to everyone. It's really, really old. Like it's been in print forever, but it's still going strong. And I actually got a kid's version for my 9-year-old daughter or 8-year-old daughter. So there's like a children's, simplified. So that is just, I think, a really great starting place, because it's informative, but it also gives you like, okay, here's a recipe you can make now to try this and put it into action. So as when I read that, I just felt like this, all the other health information that came across my path, which was a lot because I was interested in health and I just absorbed it. It was all like building upon this concept of there is proven like vast variety, like this data that he gave us, it makes so much sense. Like if you think about it, like of course, like people were healthy in their native environments and they kept reproducing and having healthy generations. It makes sense. But the fact that he captured it and he explained like this is what they did and this is how you can do it too. And so everything kind of built upon that, like everything that I heard and read. So then it wasn't just like random piece of information here and random like thing that's being recommended here, and random product and random supplement. It's so overwhelming. It's just there's so much out there, and you're just like, if you don't have a framework in which to operate from on how the human body achieves health, like at a fundamental level, like you get caught up in all these rabbit trails that just may or may not be a service to you and can oftentimes totally overwhelm you. And so I think that simplicity is just beautiful. And
Yeah.
it's simplicity and diversity at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about it. I kind of feel like as a homeschooling too, like I've seen a lot of parallels in what I learned from that is in a lot of the other areas of life too, especially like homeschooling kind of have a similar thing where you have like there's a lot of ways you can homeschool and have awesome kids and awesome results. But there's certain principles like that if you can, make sure that you have those solid and you're really prioritizing those, especially if things get crazy, that, and all the fluffy stuff out here can go. But if you hold on to those core, like they'll do well, like they'll thrive. their minds will grow. And I think that's very freeing too, because it's like, I think in homeschooling world, you get that same, just like, I am so overwhelmed. There's like 1,000 different curriculums for every single subject,
Yeah.
and I have no idea what to do.
Yes.
So having that like core, I think my dad actually does a really good job of kind of like giving you those kind of like, what are those cornerstone principles that will build you the structure of a strong mind, a healthy mind, a good education. And so I think this, there's a lot of parallels there that I think are kind of neat. Um, so yeah,
Absolutely.
that's where it all started for me. So I've been like trying to figure out how to eat liver and organ meats, and like I remember feeding my 1-year-old son like fish eggs. Just like, let's try it. I wonder if he'll like them. And like, I've just been doing all this stuff since the very beginning. And my son has like, the dentist is like, oh, he has loads of room. He won't need braces. So I worked.
Oh my gosh. Well, it makes so much sense. Just foundations, these foundational principles, which you shared a good handful of them there as you were sharing about that research that you had come across.
Um,
I was curious if you could give like one other fantastic health tip to homeschool moms. Like if there was one place that they could start with a good health habit, what would it be?
well, one is hard.
Yes,
uh,
for sure.
yeah, I think that, I mean, kind of on the same track of what we've been talking about. Just realizing like you don't have to include all this acai and kale and superfoods and this, that, and the other thing to be healthy. Like knowing where it matters is super important. And I think I would say like you know, the five most important to me things to include, if obviously finances is part of it. So some of this stuff is expensive, which is why like growing it yourself was so good. But I would say like my top five, if you could be eating these as regularly as possible, maybe not daily, but as regularly as possible, these were the five things that were kind of like the most nutrient dense foods that will give you the most bang for your buck. Is good quality eggs. Actually, eggs are amazing. They're so good. Um, like good quality though. I mean, you can taste the difference between like a farm fresh egg and like store egg. So store eggs probably very little, but good quality eggs, organ meats definitely. I kind of think organ meats are sort of a non-negotiable. Like they were for all the people. If you're eating any meat, you've got to be eating the organ meats, or you're not going to be getting the balance of nutrients that God intended through that animal. Um, Bones, like bone broth, gelatin, collagen, all that's gotten really popular now, thankfully. But bone broth, again, super rich in nourishment, super easy to make, super cheap. It's just a win-win. If you can afford it, or some people have a lot of issues with dairy, grass-fed butter. Like I let my kids as babies just eat butter sticks, like if they wanted to, because I knew they needed that fat. And butter has been so demonized, but grass-fed butter is such an easy way and such a delicious way to get those nutrients. And Weston Price really valued the grass-fed butter in his program. And then, if you're going to be eating seafood, like trying to get, sardines or like salmon that has the bones and skin on, so you can get more of the full profile instead of just like skinless, boneless, fatless tuna that's just not really rich in any nutrients but protein. Like trying to choose, it's not that hard to just make a slight shift. Just, okay, I'm going to get the Aldi's has boneless, skinless, or sorry, bone in skin salmon for really inexpensive, wild caught. I use that instead of tuna. It's just like that little shift of like the bones and the skin are good. They're full of nutrients. I want those. So making those shifts of like, what are those nutrient dense foods that really pack a punch and make a difference, and trying to get those in as much as you can. And I'm actually planning on creating uh, haven't done it yet, but well, actually by the time this podcast comes out, I will hopefully like a 5 snacks or quick foods you can make in 5 minutes or less that contain all of the things we do. Those 5 things,
Oh, I
like
love that.
bone broth and the like eggs. My kids don't love just plain eggs. So how can you get especially the egg yolks in So yeah, that's something I want to create, because it's like it can be really overwhelming. Like, okay, well, my kids only like this and that and the other, and how can you like take snacks and foods they already like and just like, okay, you know, I'm gonna do this swap, or I'm gonna, add this thing to it to make it healthy and really nutrient dense, so that it's actually like kind of filling, like replenishing them. So I think that's kind of the main thing. I mean, not the only thing. I would definitely like sunlight and being outside and having your feet on the ground, or, the barefoot. Like those are also important in your mental state and all that. But just like really practically, just focusing on those nutrient dense foods and not getting distracted with all the like expensive, like kind of fringy things, because those are just kind of a waste of time a lot of times if you're not focusing on the core stuff. So
Those are
yeah.
such great tips. And a common theme I keep hearing you talk about and repeat is the whole. And so as we come to a close today, let's talk about whole sticks and what it
Yeah.
is and where listeners can get their hands on some.
Yeah, so this whole sticks was born kind of from this knowledge and also just my own experience. Like I have cows, I have beef in my freezer, I have liver, and I had a bunch of kids and I was morning sick and I just like could not figure out how to eat it. Like it was just really hard. Like to actually make it part of my regular diet. Organ meat. So liver, heart, kidneys, those are kind of the big ones that you can get. There's some more obscure ones, but those are kind of the big superstars. And so like I said, we were putting in our ground beef, but I was like, well, we can't, you still have to cook the ground beef. You still have to do that. And so we pursued these beef sticks with the whole cow ground beef. We called it whole cow ground beef because it was the beef with basically the same ratio that's in the cow of meat and then the organs mixed in. So it like, if you've ever tasted liver and you hate the flavor, it's indetectable. I hate liver flavor and I can't taste it at all in, any of that. So we turn that into beef sticks that are um, just like, dehydrated, like just like snack sticks. And they are natural, like no nitrates, no preservatives. Um, and we call them whole sticks with an X. So whole sticks with an X, because we're like, well, we got the whole cow, and we originally had the whole cow project was kind of our beef selling business. So we did whole sticks for the beef sticks. So we just like launched a few months ago, but it's been going awesome and everybody loves them. They taste so good. Like you would never guess that they have organs in them. And no one else on the market has done this. They sell beef sticks and they sell like capsulated organs, but if you've got kids that don't swallow pills, or you forget to take pills like me, or you don't want to take pills because they're not as bioavailable, like, it's putting it together, and you can't really buy them anywhere else. You can't buy this like easy to eat, delicious, just open it. Kids love it. My 2-year-old eats them. Like, we've been able to just, they pack great. Like it's kind of like a beef stick with all the benefits of that, but then it's the organ supplement too. So one beef stick has the equivalent of like 5 capsules of like beef organs. So like, people, there's like 14,000 buying every month of like the top organ desiccated organ brand online, because people, it works, it makes you feel better, it's helpful, but they don't want to eat it. They don't know how to get that into their diet, cook with it, because it's slimy and it's, bad taste, and so they swallow it. But 5 capsules are in one organ, that one of the whole sticks. So I'm really excited. It's like you could even eat half a beef stick and it'd be like swallowing almost 2.5 capsules of organs. It's like that's so much, you can't get easier. So that was kind of our vision for that, was like, how can we help make like one of these core principles of nourishing diet as easy as possible, and like just no matter what you have going on in your life, like pregnancy, postpartum, traveling, you can always be fueling your children, especially with those nutrients, because kids are, they're growing and they need those nutrients. Like their bodies don't stop and wait for you to get your meal plan figured out. Like you've got to keep fueling them. And so making it easy is just was kind of our vision with that. And people have been like so grateful, just like, oh, I'm so glad that this makes so much sense. Like, I'm so glad you created this and your kids love it. And so that was kind of, that was the vision. It all born from my, 12-year-old nursing tradition phase.
That is so
All the way
oh my gosh.
around.
Julia, that is so cool.
So,
I'm so excited for you guys. And honestly, I'm so proud of you. This was important to you and you're passionate about it. And then here you create and put this product out into the world to
yeah.
make people healthier, following
Well,
this passion that you have. I mean, it is such a cool story. And being an
thank you.
entrepreneur myself, like it can be scary and there can be risk, but I know you believe so strongly in this. And I'm super excited to help people get this product in their hand. So they can go
Yeah,
to, is it wholesticks.com, STIX.com?
exactly. Wholestickswithx.com. And yeah, you can order on there. And I wanted to offer all of your podcast listeners the coupon for 30% off. So the code, I just did Joy30, keep it really easy. Like joy
Joy
at
30.
home.
That is so generous
So
of you,
Joy
Julia. Oh my gosh. Thank you
30.
so much. We'll be sure and link all of that up in the show notes so that people can
Awesome.
get their hands on this incredible product. And then do you want to give the other places where listeners can follow you or connect with you, like on social media?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not very active at the moment on Instagram. I just have had a lot going on, but I am on Instagram. Just Whole Sticks is our handle. Um, I'm also on Facebook, same one. And if you want to like email me or reach out to me directly with messaging on those or emailing through the website, we have like my email address is on there or like a message form. So that's a good way to get a hold of me because it goes straight to my like priority inbox. And yeah, that's where we are right now. And hopefully we want to eventually get, some more stuff on YouTube and things, but that's in the future when we have more
Perfect.
time. So
Perfect. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
Julia, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. I know you have so much going on in your world. So, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining and for sharing your passion with the listeners. It's been so fun to have you on the show today.
It has. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was just like, wow, this is wonderful. I'm not like an expert on anything per se. I'm just another like mom who's, thought a lot about it. And I hope that, what I've shared is helpful. And, even just one little change, it's like, makes a huge difference. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully this was helpful. And I love to talk about this stuff. So if anyone wants to reach out to me or was like, wait, what did you like? I want to find out more about that one thing you said. Like, I would love to chat. So just reach out. And I'm just another mom, but I'll share what I can. So
Oh my gosh, Julia, you're so great. Thank you again for sharing today. Your heart absolutely shines through. And I feel like you gave us such a deep dive into good health and homeschool and even homesteading. This was
yes,
such a fun conversation today. So, my friends, as you're listening here, be sure and head over to Wholesticks, that's STIX.com. And Julia was so generous to create that code Joy30. We'll put all of that in the show notes so you can go get your hand on this incredible product. Oh my gosh, I'm excited to share it with the world. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. And for now, Julie and I are signing off with joy.